which make up only 13% of the population across the country, 16% of the labor force, and are 18% of business owners, actually own 28% of the Main Street businesses. And what do I mean by Main Street? Next slide. Well, I mean dry cleaners, where immigrants own 58% of all the dry cleaners in America. 53% of the grocery stores, 38% of the restaurants. Our region is a little bit lower than this, but it is still significantly impressive. And I know in cities like Detroit and Toledo and Cleveland that have really decrepit main streets, and that we talk a lot about how do we bring back our commercial corridors to revitalize neighborhoods. Immigrants have a lot that, to offer in helping us do that. So these are 31 of the 50 largest metros that between 2000 and 2013, all of the net Main Street growth occurred through immigrants. So you can see New York on the left. And what that means is, the orange is that there were roughly 6,000 more immigrant Main Street businesses in the New York Metro in 2013 than 2000. And it means there were roughly 5,000 less US-born Main Street businesses. Now what that really means is there was probably 6,000 new immigrant businesses created and 130,000 went out of business, right? There's a rapid churn on both sides of this number. But in 31 of the 50 metros, largest metros in America, all of the net Main Street growth over that 13-year period is from immigrants, and a large share in the other 19 metros. Yep. So, when we talk about the work that is going on across those 22 cities in the We Global Network, they all started with that question that I first asked you, of understanding what their region's economic development means. You know, before I get into what are these communities doing, this is a good place to pause. So all of that is the case making on why you should care about immigrants. Now there are other reasons around agriculture that I'm not as well versed at, but how important immigrant labor has been to the agriculture industry. But I just wanted to stop for a second, ask if there are any questions. We're about halfway through our time tonight. Statements, concerns? Nope. Bruce?
And the microphone to yourself? Yeah. We've been working for several years developing housing initiatives. We have complex issues with housing in the university town. And we've been thinking about how do we attract millennials, entrepreneurs, young professionals. And so as we now think about attracting immigrants to our community, creating businesses and so forth, are there particular housing issues or types of housing that maybe we may not have thought of before in terms of, is there anything unique that immigrant entrepreneurs would be looking for in terms of housing or business spaces?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. So one is that those Main Street entrepreneurs and when I look across the city of Detroit, where we have some very distressed neighborhoods and very distressed commercial retail corridors, you often find immigrant entrepreneurs, ethnic families as the first businesses to move in, well before certainly like big commercial boxes and national retailers would move in. And they're attracted to the low cost to entry. They're attracted to the fact that the real estate is cheaper and that they can move in and own a store in Hamtramck for $50,000 that in Queens, New York would cost them $500,000. And we literally have Bangladeshi members migrating from Queens, New York to Hamtramck, Michigan, because they've heard about you can buy a house for $35,000 and get your store set up for $50,000, and those are literally 1/10 of the cost. They tend to work in markets where there's lower profit margins, and they may work longer hours and rely more on family and friends to staff their retail establishment. So low cost, that's also true in housing. So what we see is that like in the city of Detroit, some of the ethnic enclaves on the outer edges, like Dearborn and Hamtramck, immigrants are moving into the city from those suburban communities because of the lower cost of housing. And so they're a little more willing to move into a neighborhood that housing stock might not be as kept up, might be more distressed because of cost. But in terms of tracking millennials, I think immigrants and immigrant retailers play a critical role in creating the kind of diversity and the excitement. So, millennials don't necessarily want to just go to a TGI Fridays or Red Robin. They're also interested in a Mexican restaurant, in an Indian restaurant, and so creating some of the diversity that millennials seek. And this is happening all across communities like Bowling Green and Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Battle Creek, Michigan, and other mid-sized Midwest cities that are relying on immigrant entrepreneurs to provide some of that more diverse retail experience that they wouldn't get otherwise, and that people are going to big cities to crave that kind of diversity. So there are some opportunities, and I'll think more about that, and maybe we can follow up on that. Other questions? I appreciate a question. I might have to do more paired sharing if you guys don't talk to myself.
Focusing mostly on formal economy, with data base, right? Can you talk a little bit about informal economy, small businesses that probably are not listed in the
Sure.
federal government?
Yeah, I think it's really reflected in those self-employment numbers. So sometimes we talk about, particularly for the non-degreed immigrants, even some of the high-degreed immigrants, entrepreneurship of necessity. So they can't walk, we see engineers who can't walk into Ford's engineering interview room and get the job because they're undergraduates from one of India's 5 IT technology schools, and nobody at Ford knows it, but the average engineering firm doesn't know what their schools are, therefore discounts that resume and doesn't look at them, and so they'll go into business for themselves. And that happens among the self-employed. So you could be a landscaper and you end up working, and often what we find is because, in part, many people come from cultures that don't formalize their economy as much, that you don't tell the government what you earn, that that it's accepted, that you're not going to be paying certain taxes, that there aren't requirements to register your business or to get a health code certification to serve food. There's a lot that happens in the informal economy among immigrants that's not at all barely captured. So the actual impact of the immigrant economy is probably much larger than a lot of the things I presented. What we have done is to create some micro-entrepreneurship programs that are really designed to help people who are self-employed, who are offering some form of a business service. And the interesting thing is, when we use the word entrepreneurship, they don't even identify as entrepreneurs or business owners, but they know that they sew clothes. They know that they cook food for celebrations and sell it to people. They know that they do landscaping or brick masonry. And so what we try to do is help them understand the tenets of the formal business economy, identify why it might be in their self-interest to go above ground in the business economy, but then also train them to understand how it works and to be successful at it. What I see in my neighborhood, in a thriving Latino community in the city of Detroit, is a lot of extremely hardworking people who are doing okay for themselves, but who are really offering superior service at a discounted price. So my dad is a licensed contractor, and he's out in the expensive suburbs. He can't imagine what I can get in terms of carpentry, drywall, electrician from the folks in my neighborhood. They're providing every bit of quality service that he pays top dollar for at a half to a third the cost. In part is because in their world, their market is our local neighborhood, and that's what that market will bear. And we help them think about, rather than just barely getting by, you could be doing quite successful in growing your business if you help understand how to market and get into that formal economy and compete with the skills that you're bringing. So, yeah.
Follow-up question. So a lot of these formal economy uses
Yeah. First of all, our data is almost all census data. Census data does include folks who are undocumented. So it relies on what people answer in terms of the survey. There's a lot of academic research to suggest that undocumented are undercounted, that they're fearful of the census process, and that they don't respond. And certainly in the past, there's been no, I mean, you could be undocumented, fill out the census. We encourage undocumented people to fill out the census. And by the way, many employers do pay above board, and through ITINs and other systems are filing taxes and saying these are my employees and this is the Social Security number they provided me, and sometimes are not aware of their labor, and sometimes it's a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy. We're not a legal services organization. I can tell you as a former state rep that represented a large undocumented population in my community, we used to do free tax prep for low-income people and strongly encourage and explain to those who maybe were in the process or didn't have documentation how important it was to file taxes. While there are many tax benefits that low-income people can qualify for, like the earned income tax credit, that undocumented people cannot qualify for, the IRS has an absolute firewall of sharing information with immigrations and customs enforcement. So there's no threat at all to undocumented people filing taxes. At least there's never been. Can't predict the future under the current, but I would imagine there's still that's going to be held sacred. And then secondly, many undocumented, as you may know, many undocumented people are in all kinds of different states of status. And I'll tell you about Olga Gonzalez, who ended up as my district manager when I was in office. And I met Olga when she was in high school. Olga had one parent from Mexico, one parent from the United States, and was born in Mexico. And then had three younger siblings who were born in the United States after the family moved to the United States. At some point in high school, and she was bright enough that this inner city kid had a foundation send her to Grosse Pointe Liggett, if you know that school, but a very elite private school in the suburbs. And as she was thinking about college, she began to realize that she didn't have a Social Security number. Her siblings did, her parents did, but she didn't. And began to ask questions and realized that she was undocumented, had not been brought here. She's technically a dreamer. And this is before DACA. So she applied to become legal, met with a lawyer. The lawyer said, this is a good, strong case. You were born to a U.S. parent outside the country. They should have declared you when you came in, and there was a process then, but you didn't get that. Now you've got to go through this line. But I think at the end of the day, you will get your documentation. She got into Michigan State University, enrolled there, was not able to access any student aid, and had a private bank loan pulled at some point when they realized she was undocumented. And then basically went to community college where she could afford and worked under the table. I couldn't hire her because she was undocumented. I wasn't going to break the law as an elected official. I could let her volunteer on my campaign, but I couldn't pay her. And then eventually, after waiting 7 years, she got a hearing, and she was declared to be a green card holder and given a Social Security number, graduated from Michigan State University, got a job for a state representative running his district office. So there are a lot of people in those stages, and evidence of tax paying and presence here can be very important as they go through that process. So it's not a bright, as you know, it's not, go ahead, Brittany, but it's not a bright line always between what someone's status is or is not. Go ahead.
Just going to follow up on that, but I know that you're very involved in Toledo, Lucas County, and Toledo, and so it's one of the reasons why we partner so much with advocates for basic legal equality, or ABLE, because they're able to meet with community members to talk about immigration status, and if they do qualify, if they're undocumented, and potentially if they're qualified for some type of documentation status, they can assist them with that process. So asylum seekers, we see a lot of asylum seekers in Toledo, especially folks that are coming by way of Syria or Iraq, and so they do asylum seeking
So I'm going to go, just in the interest of time, through what do communities do when they've come to the realization that being welcoming can help move their community forward. And the first, as I mentioned, is to understand your own economic priorities. So this is a copy of a guide that I wrote that you can find on Welcoming America website. It's called The Guide to Immigrant Economic Development. Next slide. And in the guide, we've outlined both just a whole getting started process you can go through to help align your economic development priorities with some of the immigrant welcoming opportunities. And then we go through very specific strategies around entrepreneurship, international student retention, workforce development, export promotion, home ownership, and other areas where we highlight some basic principles and we highlight some best practices, organizations. It's not a complete guide. It's about 130 pages. It's free for download. We don't have the printing budget to bring copies for you all. I don't even have a copy in my office. All right, so I'm going to go through some highlights in the guide. We talked about how important immigrant entrepreneurs are. So what do people do? There is a few copies of a publication, that follow-up publication we wrote for Welcoming America called Seeds of Growth. It's kind of written for economic development chamber, mayors, and other leaders who want to encourage immigrant entrepreneurship. Next slide. Well, what does it look like in the ground? And here you see mention of 3 We Global members. So Neighborhood Development Center in Minneapolis-St. Paul is probably the most advanced. 25-year history of taking low-income communities of color, both immigrant communities, also African-American communities, Native American communities in the Twin Cities, offering a basic business planning class in 7 different languages, offered through trusted community organization with plenty of one-on-one time, small cohorts, to work with those home-based businesses and others to help them bring above ground. Over the 25 years, they have helped over 700 people who are now still in business. Those people have gone on to create about 4,000 jobs that pay on an average of $17 an hour, and over 60% of those businesses are in formerly vacant spaces. And so we've recreated their model in Detroit, in prosperous Detroit. We've graduated 800 people in our last 5 years and have put out about $800,000 in micro loans and have created about 250 jobs. And then Upstart in Syracuse, which is run by Center State CEO, which is their chamber economic development organization, is similarly training immigrant entrepreneurs and businesses next. Home ownership. So this is houses in my neighborhood in Detroit, what much of the housing stock looks like in Detroit. And we know that immigrants are a growing part of our city, in fact, the only growing population in our city. And so what we've been able to connect is, this is Sergio Martinez on the left. He is a dreamer. So he was brought here as a child by his mother from Mexico and graduated high school, and then lo and behold found he was in the labor pool and couldn't work until President Obama created the DACA program. At which time he was hired as the day manager at a local hipster slider place called Green Dot Stables, which I'll come to from Detroit. And he's been very successful, and we helped him find a vacant home from our county tax foreclosure auction. Next slide. And he moved into that home. Similarly, this is Myra on the right. She is a documented immigrant from Mexico with her daughter, single mom. Never thought that she would be able to be a homeowner, but consistently paying $750 a month rent for the last almost 10 years to take care of her daughter. And we helped her find a vacant home that she bought for less than $5,000, moved into. Now she has, one of the units she has is income producing property. So we've basically been connecting our immigrant community that is, if they're undocumented, can't qualify for a mortgage, and oftentimes is very resource poor, with some of our vacant property, and they've really used a lot of the do-it-yourself ethos to fix those properties up and move in. We've done that 38 times, and we've produced a tool, and there's a copy of the report online at weglobalnetwork.org/landbank, if you know what a land bank is. And on that tool, you can choose one of 23 Rust Belt cities. We don't have Bowling Green, but we do have Dayton and Toledo. You pick a price for the house, and it will tell you how many immigrant households are in that city that currently are renting, that could afford that unit of housing at 28% of their take-home pay. But cities are really starting to innovate in this area and thinking about how to connect to immigrants. Next slide. And as we've talked about, so these are the 23 Rust Belt cities. The bottom line number here is that 11% of the major cities in the Rust Belt are headed by immigrant households. 11% of the households are immigrant headed, and 13% of the renting households who could afford moving into a new house are immigrants. So they're disproportionately represented as renter households. Next slide. And then what this shows you is that in those 23 Rust Belt cities, really all but one or two now have growing immigrant populations, but only 4 or 5 is the overall population growing. And it's only about 7 or 8 is in 10 I can see the overall population is growing, and in 6 of the 10 the U.S.-born population is growing, meaning in 4 the immigrant population is growing so fast it's outpacing the loss of U.S.-born population. But in the other 20 or so, the other 10 or so, they have growing immigrant populations and not growing populations. So I mentioned international student retention. Next slide. So this is, we run the country's first international student retention program. We have 6 universities. We connect every year as many as 2,500 students through job fairs, one-on-one employer events. Last night we were with Kin and we had 19 international students who were IT and computer science majors. They do a lot of online